Hi, I'm Phil Constantine. In this edition of Travels with Phil, we're traveling back in time to 1977. This is one in a series of interviews I did for a program called To the Point for Rice University in Houston. I helped to create this program, which showcased some of the brilliant people associated with Rice. This episode is with Rice professor Dr. Charles Doran. We talk about his book, Myth, Oil, and Politics, OPEC, and the Future of Oil. Dr. Doran was a distinguished professor and member of the faculty and eventually the director of the International Relations Program at Rice University. In 1979, he moved to Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where he held the Andrew Mellon Chair. Dr. Doran has received the Governor General's International Award, the Donner Medal, and the American Political Science Association's Lifetime Achievement Award in Canadian Studies. He was also awarded the Distinguished Scholar Award for Foreign Policy from the International Studies Association. Dr. Doran is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. In 2016, the Council appointed him to its independent task force on U.S. strategy in the Arctic. There are links to his biography and works in the description field below, plus additional appropriate links. While this was originally a radio program, I've added images for this video. The audio remains exactly as it was originally broadcast in June 1977.
Throughout the United States, the subject of energy has become a major topic among people, and there are certain things that are taken for granted, such as the fact that the Arab oil companies are charging unfair oil prices, that the United States oil corporations are getting obscene profits, that divestiture is the means of salvation through regulation, that the OPEC countries will work together throughout the unknown futures. These may be true and they may not be true. We'll be back to talk about that in just a moment.
To the Point, presented by Rice University.
Phil Constantine, and my guest on this program is Dr. Charles Doran, who has written a new book called Myth, Oil, and Politics on the subjects we've mentioned. Dr. Doran, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm enjoying it.
And I guess we should really start talking about one of the things that I mentioned before, which is divestiture. Some people this is a salvation, and to other people this is also possibly a damnation of the current system we have. What exactly appears to be the argument on both sides, and which way do you think really should be the way or the course that this country should follow?
Well, divestiture is a complicated legal and political issue. First of all, what divestiture is the breakup of major corporations. And of course, it's been asserted that this could take place in either a vertical form, which would mean the severing of operations, let's say, at the refinery level or at the retail level from the rest of the operations, or horizontal divestiture, which would mean separation of the various areas of energy work, such as coal mining and oil production, from one another. But what we largely think of, I think, in terms of divestiture is the vertical sort of divestiture. And I would assert that, contrary to a common sort of perspective, that the real purpose of divestiture is political, not legal in the standard or classical antitrust sense.
What exactly do you mean by that?
When I say political, I mean the purpose is to try to sever the relationship between the corporations and OPEC by forcing the companies to split up their various operations. The real purpose, in other words, is to try to get at OPEC through the companies.
Where did you come about with this idea? What are the facts that substantiate this viewpoint?
Well, it's quite clear when one goes through the hearings, for example, and one explores, in fact, the history of the divestiture effort relative
about
to
the hearings in Congress.
The congressional hearings, yes. That in fact this is a unique rather unique set of proceedings. First of all, the normal antitrust efforts have been against a single company. They've normally been against companies that have, in some sense, broken the rules in terms of restraints of trade or something of this type, or have had excessive concentration. Let's say a few companies have controlled too much of the market. By none of these grounds would divestiture be an appropriate instrument against the oil companies. Out of the top 20 industries, the oil industry is among the least concentrated. The real purpose is clearly a political one, because there are those who think that without the integration of the major corporations, OPEC would fall apart.
So you're thinking along the lines of the belief that the United States oil companies are working hand in hand with OPEC.
Yeah, the argument, I think, is often made that the companies, in fact, are acting as a broker for the oil-producing countries, because the countries themselves could not agree on policy. Unfortunately, this overlooks a lot of things, such as the fact that Saudi Arabia has itself something like 30% of the OPEC market, and thus can act as a price leader, and indeed has, for a series of other reasons, both excess capacity and has the capacity to reduce production very substantially, giving it immense leverage within OPEC to determine policy. It's also the case that if divestiture proceeded, the large American companies would no longer be the dominant companies in the world oil market, and thus the United States would no longer have the kind of representation, let's say, in the corporate setting that it now has.
Well, if you had been at any gas station at almost any place in the United States during '73, in those particular eras close to either side of 1973, you would have heard the opinion being expressed that all you had to do was just wait for the prices to go up, and all of a sudden there would be more oil than you could use. And voila, it appeared that did come true once the price had gone up, maybe 10, 20 cents in some areas.
Yeah, there's no doubt that the experience at the gas pump, while a good indicator of some things, is also a very confusing indicator of others. One of the problems is that if a person goes to the gas pump today and gets all the gas he or she wants, it's hard to believe that looming in the future a crisis, energy crisis, is possible. It's also very hard to know, for example, at the gas pump, regardless of the price, what percentage of the gas that one uses comes from the United States or comes from abroad. One of the things that Americans have really forgotten is that since 1970, oil production in this country has declined in an absolute sense. We're producing less than the total production here has dropped off by more than 1 million barrels a day. And in fact, demand has increased much more substantially than it was in 1970. So we are importing more than 50% of our oil today in a way which was not believable for most people 2 or 3 years ago.
You mentioned that Saudi Arabia can take the lead in price fixing, or not price fixing, but the price of oil. The one thing that kept coming back to my mind during the oil embargo was that two sides. One was that it was a complete embargo, and the other one that it was a sieve, that oil was coming from all kinds of sources, that OPEC was not working together. How is OPEC standing? Are they working together, or are they just merely battling together for one single battle?
One cannot answer that very profound question
in
very
25
simply.
words or less.
That's right. It is the case that if one looks at developments over the last 10 years, that OPEC has far more control over price, over the distribution of oil, over the transport of oil, and increasingly even in such areas as refining than it did before. If one looks at the 1967 war situation, an embargo at that time was attempted. It failed miserably. In 1973, there was some success in the embargo, although the oil companies, by and large, attempted to try to distribute the oil as reasonably as they could, of course earning a very nice profit in the process, but distributing the oil in such a fashion that no government would be completely isolated. However, if an oil embargo were to take place today, it's not at all clear that the companies would be in the same position to do what they did in '73.
Yes, right now the Shah of Iran is basically, to most reports, in debt, or is having a bad deficit spending problem, balance of trade problem, because he has gone out, and with the assumption that they were going to make so much money from the oil, he has gone out and tried to create so many social programs and things such as this, and also building up military, that he has been pushing very much so for the increase in price, but Saudi Arabia has kept the increase smaller than what the Shah had asked for. Is this the most possible most possible future problem that will develop between the OPEC countries, that maybe the Shah and then the other side of it are going to separate in their demands for price increases?
Well, the first point to be made is that as of this spring, it seems clear that the two-tiered price system in OPEC is going to be phased out. That is, the Saudis are going to come up in price and the others are going to give up their added demands for price increases for the time being. Really, to understand this situation, one has to recognize that there's a profound difference of interest between countries in OPEC. There's the high price preference countries want to spend a lot of money on development programs. They have huge populations. They have, in most cases, oil reserves that will only last 20 to 30 years. Right. On the other hand, we have the low price preference countries that have capacity to produce well into the 21st century, have small populations and a little need of revenue. In fact, their financial reserves are now very vulnerable to all kinds of threats, including foreign exchange threats. So, the real point here then is that the low price preference countries don't want to raise the price too fast because they don't want to see a lot of new oil and a lot of artificial energy from artificial sources come online in the next 10 to 15 years and possibly drive the price down for what they have. Also, some of these countries do not have a very strong military base and are concerned that other governments on the high preference side may in fact use their money very effectively for military purposes.
One thing we had talked about earlier was the high probability or possibility, or ease would be a better word, for sabotage to go on in the oil-producing countries because of just the openness of the way the piping systems are and the drilling systems are. Is this really a feasible thing because of the guerrilla activities in the Middle East?
In the past, there has been, relative to the accessibility of these installations, not a great deal of subversion and sabotage of this type. But there is no doubt that all of these installations are very vulnerable to attack. And it is the case that it would take a very substantial military effort to try to protect them if governments really wanted to disrupt the supplies. But it has to be pointed out that, at least as far as OPEC countries themselves are concerned, each country has the same problem of protecting its own installations, and hence it has a less vigorous interest in trying to destroy or affect those of its neighbor.
Do you think that the problem that developed in Saudi Arabia just recently with one of the wells being out, which I believe was delaying about 100 million, not 100 million, maybe 1 million barrels a day because of that problem, do you think that might have been sabotage?
It seems evident today that this was not simply a technical kind of problem, but rather there were disruptions for other reasons. We don't have evidence as to the origins, but it is clear that not just a fire occurred, but in fact there were political issues and commercial issues involved as well.
Possibly by the time this program airs, the first oil will be coming out of the Valdez port on the Alaskan pipeline. And I'm curious if you have heard or believe in the possibilities that due to the United States West Coast's inability to process all this oil, that a trade may be worked out, such as to ship the oil to Japan and then get an equal amount from Venezuela to the United States, where Japan would pay, which is getting quite a bit of their oil from Venezuela, would pay for the American oil coming into there. In other words, essentially a trade-off. Japan can get it from Alaska easier than we can get it from Alaska here in the 48 states. Do you think these kind of programs will work out through international cooperation between the industrialized nations?
I think the way you've described it is exactly the way that one would anticipate seeing a trade-off. One of the great ironies is that in politics in this country we seem to be able to confuse and obfuscate more issues than we solve. And there seems to be great resistance to the very simple notion that one can sell oil abroad or trade it for other imports that we would normally get anyway, and buy with that foreign exchange oil that is closer to us much more cheaply somewhere else. The real problem is that we have too much oil on the West Coast, too little on the East Coast, and there are 3,000 miles or so that separate these two areas, in fact by water route even a greater distance. So it's only plausible to sell this oil to, let's say, to Japan in return for imports that we would already get from Japan, or in fact work out a trade-off whereby we would simply get oil from someplace else on the East Coast and thus save the transportation costs. But that simple argument seems to have lost itself on many people in this country.
Because one of the problems is trying to get the supertankers through the Panama Canal, and when you have to go around Cape Horn, it is so much more longer and more costly for transportation costs.
That's absolutely the case. Yeah.
Briefly summarizing, what do you think will be the most major problem in the oil exporting, importing, the entire petroleum industry that may pop up as a surprise to people?
I would say that a lot of people don't realize the problems that many of the companies today face in looking 20 years out and trying to decide where the industry is going to be at that time, and I go into that in considerable detail in the book. As far as we are concerned, our greatest difficulty is simply cutting back on consumption and substantially increasing production. And we don't seem to have yet a commitment nationally to do those things.
Very good. We have been talking with Dr. Charles Doran, who has got a new book out by the Free Press, I believe it is.
That's correct.
Called Myth, Oil, and Politics. And this is Phil Constantine for To the Point. We hope you enjoyed the program and tune in next week.
To the Point is produced by the Rice University Information Office at the studios of Rice Radio, KTRU, in Houston.
Thank you very much for watching this video. Please feel free to leave comments down below as long as the language is family friendly. And if you would like to subscribe to my channel, just click on the button over on the right-hand side. Thank you very much.